This time I'll be sharing with you my thoughts on Skywalk's new ENC2 liner, the Mint. So far I've tested the Mint over a few days in a wide variety of conditions. I've also done a good amount of ground handling. I've flown the Mint with 3 different harnesses, the Advanced Impress 4 and Lightness 3, and also the Sup Air Delight 4. Is the Mint a breath of fresh air, or did it leave a bad taste in my mouth? Let's find out. First, I'll cover a few details. The Mint comes in 6 sizes, covering weights from 55 to 125 kgs all up. So the aspect ratio of the Mint is 6.4 flat and 4.92 projected. That's slightly more than Jin's Bonanza 3 at 6.3 and slightly less than the Arctic R, the Volt 4 and the Photon, which are all 6.5. Interestingly, controversially, the Mint has no jet flaps. The Skywalk jet flaps are not there. Clearly Skywalk have decided to take them off on the Mint. As with all of the ENC2 liners, the Mint is certified ENC but LTFD, and that's because the EN flight certification allows folding lines, but the LTF certification doesn't. Skywalk say the Mint is their definition of the new ENC2 liner class, and this brings this new level of performance to the sports class pilots. Looking at the construction of the Mint, you can see there's quite a lot of long plastic rods in there. So Skywalk have decided to stick with their plastic rods. They call the Rigifoils. They're fairly long across the glider. I think there's not quite as much as the Bonanza 3. There's just feeling it feels like there's not quite as much, but definitely they're quite long and there's quite a lot of plastic rods in there. So for packing, from a packing point of view, it definitely requires good care. The reason for having those Rigifoils is it gives the glider better shape and a more collapse resistance, and also a more even pressure distribution across the glider, and that brings with it advantages in the behaviour in the launch, and also in just in turbulence, active air and collapse resistance. So the Mint has got reasonably pronounced shark nose on it. The Skywalk say the shark nose improves the pressure distribution across the wing substantially. In terms of materials, the upper and lower sails are made out of Domenico TX Light, and the ribs and bands, the span-wise bands across the wing, are made out of Domenico TX Hard. So let me share with you my feelings from my testing with the Mint. So first of all, let's talk about, well, feeling. Straight away from launch and all the flights I've had, the Mint feels very solid, reassuring feeling to it. The wing feels monoblock. Doesn't move around as 2 wings, and doesn't snake about even in active air. Of course, there's a point where the air gets really active. It does move and jump around and require piloting input, but the feeling of it is very solid and reassuring and sorted. Yeah, for me, just a little bit on the dampened side, but actually not too much. I feel less so than, say, the Volt 4, for example, which I think feels a bit more dampened in terms of its feedback. I think Goldilocks would be quite pleased with the Mint in terms of I think it'd be a keeper for Goldilocks. So in terms of its level of feedback, not too much, not too little. For me, I'd probably like just a little bit more feeling. But then again, when I've flown the Mint in some quite active air and when it's got choppy and stuff, I've been quite happy with the fact that it feels just very solid and more reassuring. Very glad to say that I find the feeling much better than the KN6, which I found rather sort of a bit dull and lacking feedback. Talking about the handling, I think the agility of the Mint is very good. It's not super agile, but of the 5 ENC2 liners I've flown so far, it's one of the ones that turns the best and has a good handling. I think that's again a combination of the fact that it's got good response and agility, so when you put an input in, it responds fairly quickly to that. Also the stall point, which I haven't mentioned yet, but the stall point is relatively forgiving for the class, and so you can kind of abuse the brakes a bit. It doesn't really like you stuffing the brake. That doesn't work for turning. It likes you to have speed and then roll, weight shift and turn, and let the glider have energy to turn round. That's how it turns best. And then actually I found the agility very good. If you fly it too slowly and try and turn, then I found that the handling feels a bit kind of sluggish and steady. I think it definitely prefers to be flown a bit quicker and then using a bit more weight shift and turn. the other 4 ENC 2-liners, I found the Mint to be generally more agile than the Photon and the Volt 4, which I kind of see as being similar kind of in agility, quite different in feeling, but in terms of the sort of handling and agility, I found it's better than those for me. But I found it not quite as agile as the Bonanza 3 and the Arctic R, which I think have the best handling and agility of those 5 ENC 2-liners that I've tried. But the key point here is that with the Mint, I was feeling good about and able to turn really quite tightly on some small punchy wind-blown bits of lift, and because of that it gave a really good climb advantage. And the Mint climbs really well anyway. It has a very good sink rate and a very good climb rate. We might talk about that a bit more later, but it's got very good floatability. It climbs really well. Just when you're soaring, the sink rate is really good and you're doing very well compared to pilots around you, even quite well loaded and loaded near the top. So I've flown the Mint at loads somewhere between 96 kilos up to 105 kilos. I think it does prefer to fly more loaded, just from a sort of handling point of view. Just thinking about the comparison with the KN6, and I was trying to work out. So when you fly the wings from each brand, they quite often have a similar feeling between them. What I'm really pleasantly surprised to say is that to me the Mint feels much more like a 2-liner version of the Chili 5 than it does a 2-liner version of the KN6. While I say that, the pilot demands of the Mint are significantly higher than they are for the Chili 5. Going back to the handling, one point to make is that the brake pressure on the Mint is quite firm to a bit on the heavy side, so they're definitely not light brakes. Comparing it to the other ENC 2-liners I've flown, personally I prefer the handling of the Mint to the Volt 4 and the Photon, just because I feel like it's more responsive and dynamic and I can make use of the lift better with it. And for me, I feel like the handling of the Mint is kind of on a par with the Bonanza 3, so I like them kind of equally in different ways. They've got quite a different feeling and handling about them, but in terms of agility and ability to work lift and tight difficult lift and thermals, I think they're on a par with each other. For me, the handling isn't quite as sweet as the Arctic R, and that's because I feel the Arctic R just has a slight edge in terms of when you're trying to nip the glide around and turn in some really tight stuff. But it's pretty close between those 3. The Bonanza 3, the Arctic R and the Mint for me have the best handling. Using the B risers, I feel like the Mint has a good feeling with the B risers. I had a good connection and feeling with the glider when I was using the speed bar, trying at half bar for a while and then full bar. I felt like there's a good connection. Pressure is moderate, maybe slightly firmer. It's not light, but not heavy. Difficult to say. Perhaps with the Arctic R and the Photon, maybe there's an even slightly better connection with the rear risers. Flying in choppy air on the speed bar, I'd say they're pretty sort of comparable in that way. I think the Bonanza 3, the B risers were a little bit sort of firmer, a little bit stiffer. Again, still effective. And the Volt 4, I felt the B risers were again a bit stiffer and I didn't feel quite as good a connection with the glider. Moving on to performance. First of all, the one thing for me that stands out immediately with the Mint, which actually stood out for me from the moment I launched on it, is that it has a very good sink rate and a very good climb rate. As soon as I flew out and got into a thermal and joined in with some other pilots, I felt like, oh, I can climb really well on this glider. And that's both the handling, but it's also the sink rate and the efficiency in its turns. So it's able to turn fairly tightly and pretty well, but keep efficient at the same time. It doesn't over roll or lose height in those turns, is the feeling I had. Compared to most gliders I was flying with, I felt like I had an advantage over them, but compared to the other ENC 2-liners like the Bonanza 3, and I was flying quite a bit with a very good pilot on an Arctic R, and also another very good pilot flying a Zeno 2. I felt like the Mint has at least as good, has as good a climb and sink rate as those gliders, and hold its own very well with those gliders, which is great. Speaking of glide, first of all, let's start at trim. So the glide seems really, really good. Gliding next to other pilots on standard 3-liners, I consistently felt like I had an advantage over them. seems to be gliding really well. With the other E&C two-liners, it seemed to be on a par with them. So the glide seems really, very good. The speed system, pressure of the speed system first of all is moderate to a little bit on the heavier side. It's not light, but it's very effective and very usable. And the glider feels very solid right through the speed range to right to the pulleys locked. Felt like a good increase of speed. Can't be certain, but it feels like it's maybe not quite as fast as the Arctic R and the Photon, but I feel like the Mint is quicker than the Bonanza 3, for example, and I think possibly also more so than the Volt. I think from a terms of view of performance, I think this Skywalk Mint is going to perform really well and could be another one of the gliders that's is doing well in some of the cross-country racing competitions, the sports class kind of competitions. I think it's going to do very well because it's got very good performance, very good climb rate, and it's very usable. I got to really try out again big ears, trying to do big ears and the B3s, and I reached out doing classic big ears to the outer A lines and reached up nice and high on those and gave them a really hard pull, and I tried that a few times. It just doesn't feel like it wants to do it. That the Mint doesn't really do classic big ears. So I did the way I generally do B3s, which is first of all I applied about a third to half speed bar, then reaching up to the outer B lines. You've got to reach up nice and high and then a pretty firm pull in. It's pretty much every glider I've done B3s, it's pretty firm to very heavy. I'd say on the Mint they're not really heavy, they're just firm and require a good pull in, and then they come in nicely, and that does what I call tip stalls. Felt very effective, give me a good increase in descent rate, felt very stable, and of course you keep your directional control. And as usual, you can just let go of the B3s, but you'll find they actually snap out, and that's the same on all gliders. They kind of go whack, whack. So it's probably just nicer on the glider to just ease them out. With the B3s, as opposed to big ears, they always doing, doing, doing. Next, spiral dives. Feels very controllable. I could build up my speed nice and gradually. Felt like a glider that you can go into the spiral in a nice controlled way. I could easily control coming out of it as well. Part of the reason I didn't do a spiral for too long is I wanted to save myself some height to have some fun doing some wingovers. I do think wingovers, they give an impression of the kind of dynamic handling of a glider, its ability to convert energy and how taut and solid it feels and how well it converts that energy around. Next, speaking of the stall point, yeah, the stall point is obvious for the class. It's absolutely right. The brake pressure builds up really quite obviously and gets quite firm, gives you a bit of warning, and so I think it's very good. I think it's one of the better of the 5 E&C two-liners that I've tested so far. It's probably the easiest, I think, is the Bonanza 3, the most forgiving in that regard. So overall, I do think the Mint is a very sorted and very well balanced and well aimed glider. It's got excellent performance in the class, pilot demands around the mid-C, performance right at the top of the C class, up with the best of them. Maybe not quite the top out and out performance, but then it has got lower pilot demands, so it's a very impressive package. Thinking of criticisms for it, one thing I found a little bit odd is that on the risers of the Mint that I've tried, the speed system, the lines, there's like a 2 to 3 centimetre gap between the top of the pulley and the Brummel hook, which is kind of like a waste. And other things, similarly to the Bonanza 3, it's got quite a lot of plastic rods, not quite as much as the Bonanza 3, that's got the most and requires the most care in packing. So ideally you want a nice concertina bag and a good packing technique to get that into there to pack it. You really do need to take care of those plastic rods. Have you flown the Skywalk Mint? What's your experience? Yeah, share your experience with others down below in the comments. Have you flown any of the other E&C two-liners, and how does it compare, and what's been your experience? So yeah, share that all down below. Right, it's looking flyable. Enough of this filming thing, I'm going flying. So I'm off. See ya.